For years, Charles Mercer believed there was no problem his wealth couldn't solve. He controlled boardrooms, built skyscrapers, and silenced opposition with a signature. But when tragedy struck his only daughter, Clara, leaving her paralyzed and forgotten by medicine, his power meant nothing. Specialists dismissed her. Therapists took his money. And Clara, just 8 years old, was slowly fading into silence. But when they overlooked Clara, they didn't know who they were walking past on the street. They didn't know the barefoot black boy who approached them. Micah wasn't just a beggar. He was a healer's grandson, shaped by pain, gifted with presence, and carrying a legacy most had forgotten. What came next wasn't a miracle of science. It was a return of something far older: belief, dignity, and the quiet strength of those society ignores. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you're watching from and make sure to subscribe, because the story you're about to hear isn't just about one child. It's about all of us. Sunlight filtered through the trees as Clara took her first step, uncertain but unafraid. In the distance, Micah watched, his work already done. And in that forest clearing, justice didn't roar. It whispered. Charles Mercer had once been a man who believed there was nothing he couldn't fix. He had built an empire from the ground up: real estate, logistics, tech investments. But all that power, all that precision, crumbled the moment his daughter Clara stopped walking. She was only 8. A car crash, one moment on a rainy Tuesday, a misjudged turn, and just like that, her legs were silent. Doctors from Boston to Zurich had studied her scans, nodded with rehearsed sympathy, and handed him the same sterile phrase: permanent spinal damage. Charles didn't cry. Not at first. He buried himself in hospital reports and medical journals, hunting for phrases like experimental trial or nerve regeneration. Every new word became a new currency of hope and disappointment. Clara, meanwhile, had changed. She no longer asked to go outside. Her bright laugh had folded in on itself. She spent her days in a wheelchair draped in a yellow quilt her grandmother had knitted before passing. Her eyes, once sharp with curiosity, now stared too long at nothing. On one particularly gray morning, Charles pushed Clara through a narrow alley on the edge of town, a shortcut he'd never taken before. The wheels of her chair clicked over broken pavement, the only sound in the mist. He had tried to fill the silence between them with small talk, but silence always won. How do you comfort a child who no longer believes in tomorrow? He looked down at her, his polished shoes beside her motionless feet. And for the first time he wondered, not if she'd ever walk again, but if she even wanted to. What does it do to a child's spirit, he asked himself, when everyone around her stopped saying maybe. He paused. The air was heavy with damp and regret. He didn't notice the figure watching from the shadows. Not yet. But this morning, unlike all the others, was not done with him. "Sir, I can help her." The voice was soft, nearly lost in the shuffle of leaves and the echo of their own footsteps. Charles stopped. At first, he thought he'd imagined it. Then came a shuffle, the scrape of bare feet on stone. From behind a rusted trash bin, a boy stepped forward. He couldn't have been older than Clara. His coat hung off his narrow frame like it had belonged to someone else, someone twice his size and long gone. Dirt traced the edges of his face, and one eye was slightly swollen, purpling beneath the lid. But his voice, steady, strange, and calm, cut through the air like a thread of light. I said, "I can help her walk again." Charles gripped the handles of Claire's wheelchair a little tighter. "Is this a joke?" His voice was sharp, too sharp. He regretted it instantly. "No joke," the boy replied, stepping forward. "My name is Micah. I live behind the old train yard. I saw you push her here yesterday. I waited here today because I knew you'd come." The words struck Charles like cold water. "Watched us? Waited? Who sent you?" he demanded. "No one," Micah said, meeting his eyes. But I know someone who can help. She helped me. Beside him, Clara stirred. Her eyes met the boy's, just for a moment. Then she spoke, soft as wind. "Can we go, Dad, please?" Charles froze. It had been days since Clara had said more than 2 words. Weeks since she'd said please. What would you do if your child, for the first time in forever, asked to believe in something impossible? He looked at the boy again. This wasn't a doctor, this wasn't a hospital, but there was something in his posture, his calm, his conviction, that refused to be dismissed. Charles hesitated, then gave a single nod. Micah turned and began walking toward the edge of the alley without another word. And just like that, Charles Mercer, the man who trusted only facts, found himself following a barefoot boy into the unknown. The streets grew unfamiliar the moment they left the last coffee shop behind. Micah didn't say much. Just walked ahead, steady and sure, as if every crack in the sidewalk had meaning. Charles pushed Clara's wheelchair over uneven ground, the small front wheels jolting with each stone and patch of broken asphalt. Every bump made Clara wince, and Charles flinched with her, guilt crawling up his spine like ivy. "Where exactly are we going?" he finally asked. "To someone who listens better than most people speak," Micah said without turning. They crossed under a railway bridge sprayed with graffiti and broken glass. The city thinned out, weeds pushed through chain-link fences. A shopping cart lay rusted on its side like a relic of a forgotten war. Clara's voice broke the silence. "Dad, maybe it's okay not to know where we're going." Charles looked down at her, surprised. There was no bitterness in her tone, just wonder. How often do we wait for life to be certain before allowing ourselves to hope? Twice, Charles nearly turned back, once when a stray dog barked from a scrap heap, and again when a group of teens passed, laughing too loud, too sharp. But each time, Michael looked over his shoulder and gave a single glance that seemed to say, "Trust me, just a little longer." Finally, they reached a narrow trail that disappeared into the woods. It looked more like a deer path than a road for people. Vines wrapped low branches. The trees leaned in close, like old secrets whispering. "Through here," Micah said. Charles hesitated. "If anything happens to my daughter, she'll be okay," Micah replied softly. "More than okay." Something in his voice settled the air. Charles looked at Clara. She nodded, clutching her blanket like a sailor gripping a mast. And so, with breath tight and heart heavier than reason, Charles stepped into the trees, following a barefoot stranger towards something the world had never promised him: a second chance. The forest broke without warning. Beyond the tangle of trees, a small cabin stood in a clearing, wrapped in ivy and thyme. It looked like something carved from a dream. Aged timber, a moss-covered roof, and smoke curling faintly from the stone chimney. The air changed there, thicker, quieter, almost sacred. Charles slowed. "This is it?" Micah nodded. "She's inside." Before Charles could speak, the door creaked open. An old woman stepped onto the porch. Her hair fell like silver threads, woven with bark, beads, and pieces of cloth. She wore no shoes. Her green eyes caught Clara's first, and didn't let go. "I've been expecting you," she said. Her voice was low, like earth warmed by sun. She believed. He didn't. But that's all right. Micah gave her a small nod. "This is Clara." The woman stepped down carefully, kneeling before the wheelchair. "Child," she asked, "may I touch your knees?" Clara looked to her father. Charles froze. Every instinct screamed against it. Every logical bone told him this was madness. But Clara's eyes weren't pleading. They were curious, willing. He nodded. The woman placed both hands on Clara's knees. Her palms rested gently, like one might hold something brittle and holy. Then she closed her eyes and began to hum. A sound so soft, so deep, It felt like the wind remembering something it had forgotten. Suddenly, Clara gasped. I felt something. Charles knelt beside her. What do you mean? Dingle. In my toes. He couldn't speak. His throat tightened with something old and raw. The woman opened her eyes. Her spine is not broken, she whispered. It is grieving. And grief, unlike bone, cannot be seen in scans. What if some pain lives not in the body, but in the silence no one dares to touch? Charles stared, shaken. The world he knew, ruled by reason, by science, by control, was cracking at the edges. And just beyond those cracks, something deeper waited, something older than medicine, something like hope. The old woman's hands remained still, resting on Clara's knees like folded wings. Her eyes were closed, but her lips moved, humming that low, ancient melody, neither sad nor sweet, but something in between, something that belonged to the trees and the wind. Clara blinked hard. Then her shoulders jolted slightly. I feel it again, she whispered. It's like pins and needles, but soft. Charles leaned in, stunned. Where exactly? My heels, my toes, they're... She paused, searching for the right word. Waking up. The old woman opened her eyes. Her body has waited 2 years for someone to ask it to come back. It was never paralyzed, just abandoned. Charles's voice cracked. But the scans, the specialists, all of them said they looked at bones. I listened to sorrow. A stillness fell over the room. The fire crackled in the corner. Clara was staring at her feet now, as if willing them to remember her. Could something as simple as being believed in truly reach places science could not? May I try to stand? Clara asked, her voice trembling. Charles felt everything in him freeze. The instinct to stop her was instant. He had seen her fall too many times, too hard. But then he saw it, not recklessness in her eyes, but courage. The old woman gently moved the wheelchair back. Only if you want to, she said. Clara gripped the chair's arms. Her legs wobbled like paper reeds. She pushed up slowly. Her knees shook. Charles reached out, ready to catch her. But then, one foot forward, then the other. And she stood. The room held its breath. Charles dropped to his knees, tears hot and uncontrolled. Clara, he choked. Dad, she said, her voice breaking into a smile. I'm standing. And in that moment, the world became quiet, not because it was empty, but because it was full. Clara stood, shaking, yes, but standing. Her hands hovered in the air like wings, unsure how to fly. Charles stared, stunned, as though the world had tilted and no one had warned him. He reached forward, afraid she might vanish like a dream. But Clara turned slowly, her feet shifting against the wooden floor, and she smiled. I can feel the floor, she whispered, as if confessing a secret. Charles dropped to his knees, arms wide. She stumbled into them, and he caught her not as a fragile thing, but as a miracle he never thought he'd hold again. Tears soaked his collar. Behind them, the old woman stepped back without a word. She didn't raise her arms or cry out in joy. She simply folded her hands in front of her and watched. As if she'd seen this before, many times. Micah stood in the corner, quiet as ever. Charles turned to him, still on his knees. How did you know? His voice shook. How could you know? Micah looked down at the dirt floor, then up again with a kind of gentleness that didn't belong to boys his age. I didn't, he said. I just remembered what it felt like when someone finally believed I wasn't broken. That silence returned, but now it was warm, like a blanket drawn over old wounds. What does it mean to be seen, not as damaged, but as waiting to be whole again? The cabin creaked softly with the wind. Clara reached for the back of the wheelchair and stood beside it, not in it. Her knees trembled. Her hands shook. But her eyes, oh, her eyes, held something fierce. Hope, pure and wild. Charles rose slowly, turning to Micah again. "There's no science for this," he murmured. "No," Micah said. "But science doesn't hold your daughter's hand at night when she cries." And for the first time in years, Charles Mercer had no answer. Only awe. Charles sat on the cabin steps, elbows on his knees, watching Clara rest against a wooden post, still upright, still glowing. The air smelled of cedar and ash. Behind them, dusk was setting the treetops aflame with gold. Micah crouched a few feet away, quietly drawing circles in the dirt with a stick. Charles turned to him. "I need to know," he said gently. "Who are you, really?" Micah didn't answer right away. He just kept tracing patterns in the earth, as though memories lived there. Then, without looking up, he spoke. "My foot was bent when I was born," he said. "They said I'd never run right. Kids laughed, called me twisted." Charles's chest tightened. "My mom left when I was 4, Micah continued. "She said she couldn't raise someone like me. So it was just me and Grandma." He paused, resting his hand on the ground. Someday she looked at me and said, "Enough waiting. It's time." She took me outside, put my bare foot in the dirt, and whispered something I didn't understand. Then she told me to stand. He glanced up. So I did, and I never limped again. Charles studied the boy's face, the calm that shouldn't belong to someone so young. "She've healed you." Micah shook his head. "She reminded me I wasn't broken, just hidden under the pain. What if the greatest healing doesn't fix what's visible, but uncovers what's been buried?" "She passed last year," Micah said, voice low. "They wanted to put me in a foster home. Said my stories were made up, that she was a fraud." His voice faltered. "So I ran, and I started helping people the way she helped me. Quietly. Only the ones who truly wanted it. Only the ones who believed." Clara looked over at him, her face full of something close to awe. "You found us," she said softly. Micah smiled faintly. "No, you found me. People always do when they're ready." Night had begun to settle, brushing shadows across the forest floor. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled low, casting gold against the old woman's face as she sipped from a clay cup and said nothing. Her silence as steady as the trees outside. Charles stood, still shaken by all he'd seen. He turned to Micah, who sat cross-legged near the hearth, carefully tying the frayed end of his oversized coat. "I owe you more than I can say," Charles said softly. "Let me help you. Money, shelter, education, whatever you need, it's yours." Micah looked up, then gently shook his head. "I don't need money." Charles frowned. "There must be something. A place to stay, a future." Micah offered a small smile. "My place is where people herd in silence. That's where Grandma always said I'd be most useful." Charles struggled with that, the idea of letting this child, wise beyond his years, return to alleyways and shadows. It felt unbearable. "But how do you live like this?" he asked. Micah shrugged. "People feed me. Sometimes I sleep near the trains. And when someone really needs something, not a cure, but to feel seen, they usually find me." Is it possible that some souls are called not to comfort, but to carry the pain of others? Charles reached into his coat and pulled out a business card. His hand shook a little as he held it out. "If you ever need anything, food, a coat, even just a voice at the other end, call this number, day or night." Micah took it gently, read the name, then folded it and tucked it into the lining of his coat. Clara moved to him, slowly, carefully. When she reached him, she opened her arms and hugged him tight. It was the first time anyone had touched Micah with love in over a year. And in that small moment, no noise, no applause, the loudest thing in the room was gratitude. 1 week later, the schoolyard was packed. Students lined the front steps. Parents clustered with phones raised. teachers nervously checking clipboards and name lists. It was end-of-year assembly day, the kind that usually meant trophies and applause and predictable speeches. But this year, something different stirred the crowd. At the far end of the courtyard, Clara Mercer stood beside her father, her blonde hair braided, her yellow blanket gone. Her wheelchair had been left behind in the car. Her knees trembled. Yes, her posture leaned forward just slightly, bracing for the unknown, but she stood on her own feet, holding nothing but courage. Charles crouched beside her. "Are you sure?" he asked. She nodded once, eyes fixed ahead. "I want to do this." And then she stepped forward. The first step was small. Her leg hesitated, ankle wobbling slightly. The second step was stronger. By the third, the noise in the courtyard died. Silence fell, not out of confusion, but reverence. She walked across the front steps of her school, one careful foot at a time. No braces, no chair, just willpower, just belief. When she reached the stage, the school principal, lost for words, finally asked, "Clara, what changed? What happened?" She smiled. "A boy who believed I could." The crowd murmured. Some wept. Others simply stared. But Clara wasn't looking at them. She was looking beyond, toward something else, something invisible, but not forgotten. What moment in your life made you believe again, even just for a second? Behind the school, Charles sat quietly on a bench wiping his eyes, and in his coat pocket, the business card he had given Micah remained untouched, waiting. Because sometimes the most powerful miracles don't come with thunder or light. Sometimes they arrive on trembling legs and the quiet triumph of a child who refuses to give up. That same morning, just a few neighborhoods away, where cracked sidewalks held puddles of yesterday's rain and neon signs flickered above shuttered shops, Micah sat quietly in the mouth of an alley. No audience, no applause, just him, a chipped thermos of lukewarm tea, and a girl who hadn't spoken in 3 weeks. Her name was Ava, 12 years old. Her voice had vanished the day her mother left, and no one, not counselors, not teachers, had heard it since. She sat on a crate, eyes fixed on her worn sneakers, arms wrapped tightly around herself. Micah didn't ask questions. Ain didn't offer food or advice. He just sat beside her, pulled out a scrap of cloth from his coat pocket, embroidered with a faded symbol, and began to hum. It was the same low, earthy tune his grandmother used to sing, a sound that held no instructions, only presence. Minutes passed, then more. And then something small happened. Ava didn't speak, but she leaned ever so slightly toward him, just an inch. Just enough to know she didn't feel alone. How often do we miss the quiet ways healing begins, because we're too busy waiting for something loud? Micah didn't move. He just stayed, because sometimes the greatest gift isn't fixing someone's pain. It's sitting with them in it. And as Clara walked bravely into her new life, as Charles folded her wheelchair and placed it in the attic for good, Micah returned to the only place he had ever truly belonged. Not in homes, not in headlines, but in the quiet spaces where people hurt and hide. A boy with no home, no title, no followers, only a mission passed down in whispers. To find the forgotten, to stay with the broken, and to remind them, gently, patiently, that they were never alone. Underscore, 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 underscore. Sometimes what we need most isn't a cure, but a quiet hand that reminds us we're not forgotten. This story isn't just about a child who walked again. It's about how healing can begin in the most unexpected places. A boy with no shoes, no title, and no promise of success gave something most of us overlook: presence. He didn't fix what was broken. He saw what still remained. As we grow older, it's easy to believe the world only listens to noise, money, credentials, speed. But time has taught us something different. The most powerful moments are often the quiet ones. A voice that says, "I see you." A soul that sits beside ours when we're hurting. No grand speeches, just staying. Maybe we don't need all the answers. Maybe we just need each other. So if there's someone in your life who's hurting, say nothing fancy. Sit with them. Listen. Remind them, gently, that they are not alone. Because no matter your age, your title, or your past, you have something more valuable than any cure. The ability to stay. And sometimes, that's where healing truly begins. Clara's second walk happened in silence. No stage, no spotlight. Just a quiet hallway in her home, her hand grazing the wall for balance, her breath steady. Charles watched from the doorway, eyes full but quiet. There were no reporters this time, no one cheering, and yet it was perhaps the strongest moment of all. A child reclaiming her steps, a father learning to believe in what can't be explained. Micah was gone by then, back to the alleys, the forgotten places. Still listening, still healing. His name was never printed, never praised, but his presence remained. In Clara's courage, in Charles's humility. In every moment, someone chooses to sit beside the broken instead of looking away. The story didn't end here. It became something more. Something passed down, lived out, remembered. A reminder that injustice doesn't always roar, and neither does survival. But both deserve to be seen. If this story stayed with you, share it. Subscribe to Echoes of Racism so these voices don't fade into silence. In the meantime, I've chosen 2 stories I think will move you just as much. Take care, and we'll see you soon.